Welcome, friends. I am on Ocean Point on the Atlantic Ocean. Perhaps you can hear the waves over my shoulder. I'm very glad to be here today as we are on the eve of the 400th anniversary of the Mutual Protection Order or Peace Treaty between Massasoit and the Wampanoags and the Pilgrims, not the Puritans, but the Pilgrims. This took us 400 years to get to this point. And I think it's of great significance given where our country is today. And that is, we have anything but peace. We have anything but mutual protection. My hope is, and my trust is, that if we can rise to this occasion after 400 years, that in an invisible, perhaps homeopathic, qualitative way, if we can reaffirm and reenact that original mutual protection agreement and peace treaty, that this can be brought to the challenges we're facing today in this country. The spirit of peace, the spirit of mutual protection, mutual support. And as we all know, this country is a microcosm of the larger world. So if we can do this, if we can rise to the occasion, I think we can do a deed in the spirit of those who gathered 400 years ago that can serve our times, as mentioned in an invisible, perhaps homeopathic, but qualitative way. We are going to be looking today at the third great synthesis, and Connie and Andrew go into that. And I want to say a brief word about them both, and then I'll conclude with two thoughts, brief thoughts about the challenge we have today. And that is, Connie and Andrew have stayed true to what one can call the other side of the story, as politically incorrect as it may be in our time. I have a deep respect for them both for that. What's being offered today isn't the God's truth, but it's what lies deep in the hearts of these two friends. And I've told them I hope they'll share a little bit of their biographies, because we need, I believe, to move beyond facts and figures and dates and personalities to tell something of our own story. That's when it can truly resound and truly resonate. Why we are in the positions we find ourselves in today. So my respects, Connie and Andrew, to you both for having sought to balance the scales, that the original meeting between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoags was not, I believe, accidental, incidental, or coincidental. It was providential. As friends is our meeting today as we contribute towards the third great synthesis. To conclude, two thoughts from a representative, I would say, of the true white brother. And that is, may we, those who do a lot of speaking, it's easy to rehearse certain lines. May we give a new verve and a new intonation to everything we say today on the eve of the 400th anniversary. May we find new language, new gestures, new tones and intonations, not to rehearse what it comes from the past. And secondly, and finally, before introducing Barbara, who's a blessing, who's with us, a representative of the true white brother said, ideas, which are a dime a dozen, ideas that do not become ideals, that is, that remain just talk, eviscerate forces in the soul. So friends, may we put all of our hearts and souls behind this gathering today. So thank you. And we have with us a remarkable individual who stands with a foot both in the native world and in the world of the Pilgrims, Wamsuta, Barbara, Mary Kerfus, Pokanoket clan grandmother, and Mayflower Pilgrim descendant. Thank you, Barbara, for being with us.
And Barbara will open with a prayer and a song. Thank you, Barbara.
I want to thank you all for inviting me. I think this is just a wonderful, wonderful experience. I will open with, I'm going to say a short prayer in our language and then translate, and then I'm going to go into our creed, because our creed was given to us by the Creator. Katana, du, Wetux, Tabatni, Anawayan, Nuuchi, Wam, Ni Tampog. Wetux, who gave us our prayers, and the Father gave us the law, our laws. Open our minds, our eyes, our ears, and our hearts, that we all receive this healing vibration of love and peace that Father gave to us and our fathers. Our fathers gave us many good laws, which they learned from their fathers. They told us to treat all men as they treat us, that we should never be a disgrace. We should never be the first to break a bargain. That was a disgrace to all, to tell a lie. That it was a shame for one man to take from another his life and the property without praying for it. We were taught to believe that the Great Spirit sees and hears everything, and that he never forgets. The hereafter, he will give every man a spirit home according to his deserts. This I believe, and all my people believe the same. This came from Princess Redwing, our ancestor. Now I'm going to open with because we're honoring Massasoit, I have the chief's song that was written by Daryl Jameson, but I've shortened it because of the time, not much time, and I had permission from the tribe to do this. So here we go. This is to honor all our chiefs. Way hey oh way hey way hey oh way hey Massasoit Ousamequin, Ousamequin, Wehea, Guadaquina, Wehea, Metacomet, Wehea, Wataba, Wehea, Dati, Cunit, Wehea, Awa, Wehea, Wehea, Wehea. Tabatni. Aho.
Beautiful, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you so, so much for welcoming us and opening the eastern door and bringing in your ancestors, our ancestors, as I am also descended from the Mayflower Pilgrims. And so I just so appreciate your bridging these two cultures, this Pokanoket
Yeah.
and the Mayflower, who planted these seeds of friendship, of peace and friendship. So thank you so much. And now I'm Connie Baxter Marlowe, and this is Andrew Cameron Bailey.
That's me.
And we've been at this a long time because way back several decades ago, I saw the spiritual alignment of the Mayflower Pilgrims and the native people. I came first in contact with the native people in 1991 or even earlier than that. And I had been seeking the missing pieces of our paradigm because for me, I saw that we were out of balance, that my people were out of balance. And I was seeking another way. And I looked in Europe and I didn't find another way. And then I picked up a book of native poetry in the early 70s. And I saw that there were 500 Indian nations who had another way of seeing and being. And my family in Maine, I'm 9th generation Maine, and my family had given all their money away to the people of Maine in the form of parks and libraries and all manner of things. So I knew they resonated to something different. And in the native way, I saw this giveaway. And I thought, oh, the native people are going to lead us out of where we are. And that's what's happening now with this third great synthesis. But there were two syntheses before this. And one was in Plymouth for 54 years that started with this treaty. And the second one was at the time of the Constitution, when the Iroquois great law influenced the heart and spirit of the framers of the Constitution. And for me, it was really interesting providentially how I always knew I was a Mayflower descendant, but it was never really talked about. And one day I was helping my cousin move out of a family home in Braintree, and I was full of the Peacemaker story, and I had heard that the Constitution came out of the native way, and I thought, wow, that's really important. And I went down in the basement of this house, and in the basement was a trunk, and in the trunk was the Mayflower Compact and some writings by my ancestor, my great-grandfather, for the Boston Globe about the Mayflower Compact and the significance of it. And then I realized that it wasn't just the native people, it wasn't just the great law of the Iroquois that had influenced and begun this journey towards self-determination and democracy, but it was a combination of the two. And we're going to address that in our little talk today. Andrew, do you want to introduce yourself in some way?
I'll be happy to do that. I just want to say, my friends, this is a beauty and an honor today on this March 21st of the year 2021, precisely 400 years since this remarkable and important moment in human history, looking at this globally and looking at this from the perspective of our species. I'm an Englishman. I was born in England back in 1943, right in the middle of World War II. And I ended up growing up in South Africa and being attracted to America. And something said, I have to go there. I have to come here. Perhaps in a similar way to the way the Pilgrims, somehow there was some magnetic attraction. They simply had to come. And I'm a sailor. So the wind blew me, and I came across here on a beautiful racing sailboat back on Thanksgiving of 1969. And so sort of jokingly, I call myself a latter-day pilgrim. I showed up hundreds of years late, but I got here and I'm here. And to my astonishment, I have found myself as an Englishman meeting a young lady here of English extraction. So this is English history we're speaking of here, and it's American history, specifically Native American history. To look at just this little event, this tiny group of people, these few people who came ashore at Patuxent, Massachusetts, presently called Plymouth, Massachusetts. And 5 months from this moment, historically, 5 months earlier, they set foot on American soil for the first time. And they brought with them, I think it's perfectly accurate to say they brought with them the seeds of Western democracy, because they were leaving behind them a monarchy, a world of absolute monarchy, which in the European world was simply regarded as the way God dictated it should be. It must be, it will always be. And it was about to change. So in this talk, we'll also show the extraordinary shifts that were occurring in consciousness at the time, starting with the emergence of democracy, the emergence of the right of every human being on this planet to have some degree of self-determination. And at exactly the same time, we had the scientific paradigm coming into being. 400 years ago, René Descartes was changing scientific history and our perspective. And in 1643, Isaac Newton was born. So this is a very significant tipping point, pivotal moment in human history, in English history, and it's actually, from the United States standpoint, the beginning of American history. I'm just fascinated to be here and to have learned what I've learned. So thank you.
Beginning of the United States history, because America was here long
Right,
before.
that's what I said.
So yeah, so we're going to have a little PowerPoint to show these points and to really help people to see this context, and just so we can open hearts and minds and with some facts from our perspective, what we've discovered from source material as far as the Pilgrims writing their journals, their day-to-day journals that were published at the time, and just other sort of, yeah, this happened then and that happened then, you know, and it's all a perspective. So we're taking the eagle perspective, the high perspective, the providential perspective about the evolution of human consciousness. Okay, who's taken steps? When have we evolved, taken sort of leaps? And we're expecting and knowing that we're in the middle of a leap right now. And our primary focus is to show the role of the Native Americans, the indigenous peoples, in this evolution of consciousness, the role they have played and have yet to play. So that's what my prime motivator was, because I know that contained in the indigenous worldview and connection to the sacredness and oneness of all life is the next step in the evolution of consciousness of humanity. So as we access our own true nature and the true nature of the universe. So let's go, and we're going to spend the next half hour doing that with our
slideshow.
Let's see, we're going to share screen, and we're going to go to this, and we're going to play from start,
and
and
we are.
We're going to talk about this. Let's carry on with this peacemaking, historic 1621. So we're catalyzing a mutual support agreement now with this third great
You're talking
synthesis.
about right now,
Right now.
this moment, 400
Right now.
years later. Okay.
Yeah, and here I have a quote that I've written long ago, and this is my vision, that when we come together as equals, as family, and we each open our hearts and our minds to the other, the melding of our gifts will bring a new perspective that is invisible at this time. This new perspective will allow us to see the path to true unity, peace, and freedom.
Right. It's here.
So there's the Hopi Prophecy.
And this, I don't know how long ago this prophecy came to us, but it really seems to describe our present time, our present moment, especially from the perspective of the sixth great extinction that is happening as we speak. When the birds fall from the sky and the animals are dying, a new tribe of people shall come unto earth from many colors, classes, and creeds, who by their actions and deeds shall make the earth green again. They will be known as the warriors of the rainbow.
And so we're talking about this evolutionary leap in consciousness, and that it comes from healing personal and ancestral trauma, which is so important that we heal so we can go forward. And as we go forward into a higher way of seeing, like the way the Peacemaker brought to the warring tribes of the Iroquois, he brought a higher way of seeing. And that's what's up, us moving to a higher perspective so that we can go forward in trust of each other and trust of a conscious, loving universe, and in knowing our oneness with all of creation and with an open heart, and bringing peace on earth and heaven on earth. And so this is an evolutionary leap to humanity 2.0. It's this humanity 2.0 is.
It's a next step for our species. And 400 years ago, a next step occurred when my English ancestors, Connie's English ancestors, relatives came across the ocean and met up with the Native Americans here. That was an evolutionary leap or step for humanity. 400 years down the road, here we are. And there is a prediction of something that we could call humanity 2.0, version 2 of humanity. The fully evolved human manifests the best features of all previous cultures. We are part of nature, not above it, aware of the scientific perspective, yet not ruled by it, tuned into a higher reality, yet fully present in the world. A synthesis occurs, which brings forth something that has never been on the planet before.
So in the late 1500s in England, to give a context for this, in the late 1500s in England, there was an absolute monarch. He was head of the Church of England, King James, and church attendance was required by law. But then the Bible was translated into English and it was distributed widely. So everybody had the Bible on their table, their kitchen table, and they were reading it in English. You didn't have to come through the priests and all that. And the Puritan movement started when people realized they had to purify the church. So that's the Puritan movement, purifying the church. But there were a group of people who realized they weren't going to purify the Church of England. They had to separate from it. And that started the separatist movement. And that was the right to act according to your conscience, separate from the church. And this was a treasonous act. And these people, the separatists, are who became the Mayflower Pilgrims. So in the big picture, which is where we're looking at it from, there was, do you want to talk about this, Andrew?
Okay. Yeah, so this huge change that was coming to certainly the Western world 400 years ago. God was entirely to be accessed through the church, only through the church. And God was seen as what we could call a distant patriarch, definitely a male and far away in some place called heaven. Interesting ideas. And then the separatist movement that Connie was just describing began, and it had its roots at Cambridge University in the late Elizabethan era when we actually had a queen, not a king. But by the time of the Pilgrims, it was a king, and it was King James, the successor to Queen Elizabeth. And the separatist movement had realized, as a result of the translation of the Bible into English, that we could make a direct connection to God. God was not separate from us. Now, the Native Americans have always known that, But some of the Europeans tried to convince us we had to go through the priests and the bishops and the churches. At the same time, the reductionist scientific paradigm was coming into being through the likes of René Descartes, Sir Isaac Newton, and all the way up to Darwin. Yeah, so there was this whole new view or vision of the nature of the universe that was arriving. And now we find ourselves in another quantum leap and evolution of our vision, the scientific vision of the nature of the universe. And we could call it unified physics, resonance science. And it is an evolution from quantum science. And it actually portends an evolutionary leap in consciousness for our species. We now know scientifically, we always knew spiritually and intuitively that we were all one and we were all connected. Now, science is very much proving that. And the phenomenon of inspiration, the direct connection to a source beyond religion. So now we have this movement called spiritual, but not religious. And as you can imagine, this triggered a split in the human psyche, a split in consciousness, with science challenging the church, the materialist paradigm, Descartes, etc. The point is that humanity for the first time began to see itself as separate from nature and separate from the divine. It literally caused a split in the human psyche. And I would say that at the moment, humanity is actually schizophrenic. That's what happens when you have a split in your psyche. It's time to reintegrate our divided selves. And individualism in the context of the scientific paradigm became the order of the day. Materialism, domination. Would you like to continue?
So, yeah, well, this is your arena.
Okay. So quantum mechanics, unified physics, these terms we've heard of. Quantum reality illuminates and informs the Western paradigm, expands our understanding of the nature of the universe, which allows us to align with the indigenous worldview. And that's the point of this.
Yeah, and here we have the indigenous worldview of a conscious, loving universe.
Oh, can we look at that picture? That's a beautiful picture of
That beautiful picture.
Doesn't this just
yeah.
tell you the indigenous reality?
Yeah.
My goodness, that happens to be my reality as well, by the way.
So beautiful.
Really.
And because we're moving right along because we've had so many interruptions.
Right. And nature, look at the amazing, amazing abundance and beauty and extraordinary artistic beauty.
And as we move into this next phase and we open our hearts and minds to these elements, we're going to find that they're anxious to talk to us. So it's just so exciting what's coming. And here is the indigenous worldview. And there's just some points of this indigenous worldview. And I will read some and Andrew will read some. Respect and reverence for all of life.
Interrelatedness of all things and actions.
The co-creative power of thought.
Concern for future aspects of present action.
Living in balance.
Concern for the common good.
Trust in a higher power.
Incorporation of metaphysical into physical reality.
Equality of all aspects of life.
Sharing.
Cooperation. So these worldviews, there's God-based worldviews, there's conscience-based worldviews, there's creator-based worldviews, there's providence-based worldviews, there's trust-based worldviews.
And now we have the new scientific worldview that we could call unified physics-based worldview, which is actually integral or integrating all of the knowledge and understanding that humans have accumulated in our existence.
So those are all worldviews that recognize and understand there is a higher power at work. And so now we get to the origin story of the United States of America. And this origin story in Plymouth was the origin story of this coming together that's been out of balance forever. It has never been told in its balanced way, because it glorified the Pilgrims, who actually very much deserved what they got, because they stood up to the King of England and they made a move with their lives, put their lives on the line, and committed treason and put their lives on the line coming here for this understanding that we could live as a people connected to the divine through our conscience. But that story ignored the Indian and only brought forth the first Thanksgiving with the mythologized picture of the Indians. It never went into their heart and spirit and what they had brought to it and what they were all about and who they are now. So it's just been out of balance. And now it's swung, the pendulum has swung to the other side, where it's demonizing the Pilgrims and blaming them for every ill that ever happened to the Native Americans since Columbus landed 100 years before that. 100 years? 200 years before that. 1492
to 1620. Yeah. Do the math, friends.
So what's next? Recognizing our common humanity. And it's a process. And that's what we're in the middle of right now, is really taking a leap in this process of coming together. So King James I was an absolute monarch and head of the Church of England. And when he heard about these people who were separating from them and meeting in hiding, he said, I will harry them out of the land. But guess what? It was against the law to leave England without permission. So these
from the king, so good luck.
So what these people did in their private meetings, they formed a Scrooby Covenant of 1606. And this is the essence of, this is all we have of the Scrooby Covenant. And do you want to read that, Andrew?
Sure, yeah. As ye lords, free people, joined themselves by a covenant of the Lord into a church estate, in ye fellowship of ye gospel, to walk in all his ways, made known or to be made known to them, according to their best endeavor, whatever it should cost them, the Lord assisting them.
So as you see, the Lord's free people to walk in all his ways, according to their best endeavor, in the ways that had been made known to them and to be made known to them. So they didn't think they knew it all. And they were ready to put their lives on the line and figured that the Lord was going to show up for them, which we all know that this higher energy does in fact show up for us. And
let me just say that the word Scrooby may puzzle you a little. Scrooby is a little town in Nottinghamshire, England, and that is where this entire Mayflower Pilgrim movement took root and emanated from.
Yeah, and we're going to have Gary Marks is going to be here, who is a Pilgrim scholar who has dedicated his life to studying that. And so here's the Pilgrim Trail. The Bible was translated into English and widely distributed. The 1606 Scrooby Covenant, which was treasonous. They escaped to England, to Leiden, Holland.
Escaped from England.
Yeah, escaped from England. To Leiden, Holland.
Where there was freedom of religion.
Where there was freedom of religion. And they were lecturers at the university there, and they were tradesmen there. And in 1620, they left Holland for America with visions of a society based on freedom of conscience. And that's where we're headed, where we can actually hook up to the unified field, to the divine, and act accordingly and have the freedom to do that. All people. And in 1621, they connected with Massasoit, and a creator-based spirituality. So this God-based providence spirituality meeting with the creator-based spirituality of Massasoit and the native people. So the Mayflower, 66 days at sea from September 6th to November 11th, 1620. And here are the passengers. There were 51 men, 20 women, and 31 children. So this was the invading army of the Mayflower Pilgrims who came to Plymouth in 1620. And their first landing, this is Cape Cod, if you can see it, and figure it out, because it's kind of a figure of ground kind of situation. Their first landing was there at the tip in Provincetown Harbor, where they signed the Mayflower Compact. They drafted and signed the Mayflower Compact. And this, oops.
Okay, there was a picture of them signing it.
Yeah, so then they made their way around to Plymouth and had what's called a first encounter, which we will address here. And they made their way to Plymouth, and they landed in Plymouth in December.
In mid-December, and freezing cold conditions.
Yeah, so here's the Mayflower Compact signed on November 11th. And here is what their intent with it was.
Like me to read that?
Sure.
This day, before we come to harbor, observing that some were not well affected to unity and concord, but gave appearance of faction, it was thought good that there should be an association and agreement, so that we should combine together into one body and submit to such government and governors as we should by common consent agree to make and choose. We therefore set our hands to this that follows, word for word.
And here is the Mayflower Compact. And I will just read that in the presence of God and one another, we covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, acts, ordinances, constitutions, and offices from time to time as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. So there you have it, equal and just laws serving the common good that we shall frame and act. So here was the beginning of the congregational church, the congregation being the important aspect. So this is participatory democracy, and they met with the native people who also had participatory democracy and had it for some time. So here's this, we have to keep moving pretty quickly.
The highlights of this progress that Western humanity made back in the year 1215, the Magna Carta, or Charter of Liberties. And then round about the same time, around about 1290 perhaps, the Iroquois Great Law, participatory democracy. In 1606, the Scrooby Covenant, a significant document of democracy. In 1620, the Mayflower Compact, yet another statement of how we as humans can live together and what rules we shall agree to abide by. And all the way up to 1787 with the United States Constitution.
So here we have New England before the Mayflower. We were talking about the England before the Mayflower. And here we have to really move along.
Okay.
So
just give some background on what was going on in Europe at the time. And here we will talk about what was going on in North America on the Turtle Island, the East Coast, the present day Northeast coast of the United States.
So we had the Vikings, we had the Iroquois Confederacy, and early European explorers. And here are the native New England, some beautiful pictures of this, how they beautifully made themselves up.
My
and
goodness.
they're, wow,
Extraordinary.
And here's a picture of village life of the native people. And we've already expressed the worldview that was driving these communities and these people. And I think we can just.
So
skip
here's a
this
little,
one.
that was a little map of basically how the English or how the Europeans saw it. We had New France to the north and New England to the south. But on the ground, we had multitude of Native American tribes. And that map there was 1936. So that was, so here's something you may or may not have ever heard of. The Tarleton's War somehow seems to have been lost, forgotten, suppressed, but it was a very significant intertribal conflict that occurred between the years. Actually, it started back in 1607 up north, present-day Nova Scotia, present-day maritime provinces of Canada. And it was the native tribes getting into conflict with one another over competition for the French fur trade. Typical human behavior. And a little, right in the midst of that, here at Plymouth, at Patuxet, a Captain Hunt, who was a colleague of John Smith, captured some Indian men who happened to be Patuxet, and in the year 1614, including the famous Squanto, who had been in England, he had just been returned, and somehow he was captured and taken back to Spain, where Hunt tried to sell these Native Americans as slaves. So this act occurred at that point. So it wasn't all roses and champagne.
Yeah. And so.
So what was the political or social structure? What was going on in New England before the Mayflower? Let's go back to, say, 1607, right up to the arrival of the Mayflower. Well, firstly, there was a network of confederacies, different groups, different power groups, the Iroquois Confederation we've all heard of. The Massachusetts Federation, has anyone heard of that? Headed up by a man named Nanepashemet. Very big, powerful coastal tribal alliance. The Wampanoag Confederation, the Wabanaki, and many more. So the system was much like anywhere else where humans gather together in communities and figure out how they're going to relate to one another. In 1607 to 1609, we had the
1619. Oh, 1609. Okay.
No, I said starting in 1607 and ending in 1619 with the murder of Nanepashemet, the head of the Massachusetts Federation, and it was actually the end of the Massachusetts Federation. The Tarleton's War. Competition for the French fur trade between the Micmac and the Penobscot spread to Massachusetts, who were aligned with the Penobscots. The war led to a, quote, great and general plague, which was the subject of something that I've done some deep research on, and I'm not going to go into that at the moment, but this is described in a book called A Brief Narration by Sir Ferdinando Gorges, an early colonial explorer, published in London in 1658. So that disease, we all know that a disease spread down the east coast of North America, and it was actually plague, as in the Black Death, and it came as a result of this intertribal war. We just mentioned that in 1614, Captain Hunt captured 21 Patuxet, of all people, including Squanto, and took them to Spain to be sold as slaves. And in the midst of all of that, the combination of the war and the disease epidemic, the pandemic that occurred, that was the first pandemic that we have certainly in the Northeast. The coastal indigenous population was decimated. Needless to say, making way for the colonial people, because they could not have established themselves if it was fully populated.
Yeah.
It's a big point.
Big deal. So here we have the first encounter that I spoke of, and here's a description of the first encounter by the Pilgrim people. This was on, what day was it? December 8th.
So they were exploring, they spent the night, and in the morning before it got light, anon, all of a sudden we heard a great and strange cry. One of our company, being abroad, came running in and cried, "They are men, Indians, Indians." And withal, their arrows came flying among us. Yet by the especial providence of God, none of them either hit us or hurt us. So after we had given God thanks for our deliverance, we took our shallop and went on our journey. We called this place the First Encounter.
So that was
So that was the first encounter, and the second encounter is the one we're celebrating today.
Right. And so here we have the landing on Plymouth Rock on December 16 to 18. And this was in a mini ice age for these folks. And they came aboard and they came ashore. But they lived on the Mayflower because here they were without any houses, without any welcome. And they came ashore and got very sick from scurvy and the cold, and half of them died from this general sickness. So you can see this here, the native people had died to a general sickness, a pandemic, and here the Mayflower people had died. Half their people died that first winter, including two of my ancestors, the mother and father of the young lady Priscilla, who survived and married and John Alden and carried on with 11 children and lots of descendants.
There you are.
So
let me
that
just
was the winter.
friends, let me just say briefly, we're at 50 minutes.
Yeah. So we're 2:30. Yeah. So we have got to we got to stop this and let our speakers speak, because we have the
All right.
translator coming.
So
But
here's the actual welcome that occurred on March 16th, 400 years ago last week. This tall, beautiful Native American named Samoset walked into the village that they were busy building and greeted them in the English language. Can you believe that the first native they actually met said to them, the first words out of his mouth were, "Welcome, Englishmen." I think that's just extraordinary.
So that was the next spring. So the winter, they hadn't met any native people during the winter, and they lost half of their people during that winter. And so here's meeting Massasoit on March 22nd, because Samoset went and fetched Massasoit.
Right, and Squanto, who had been in England, who had now returned home and spoke pretty good English.
And here's the Massasoit Treaty that we're celebrating today. And I'll read a little bit from their journal about that. Our messenger made a speech unto him, saying that King James saluted him with words of love and peace, and did accept of him as his friend and ally, and that our governor desired to see him and to truck with him, and to confirm a peace with him as his next neighbor. He liked well that speech and heard it attentively, though the interpreters did not express it well. After salutations, our governor kissed his hand, and the king kissed him, and so they sat down. Then they treated of peace. And here's the treaty: that neither he nor any of his should do hurt to any of their people. That if any of his did hurt any of theirs, he should send the offender that they might punish him. Oops. That if anything were taken away from any of theirs, he should cause it to be restored, and they should do the like to his. If any did unjustly war against him, they would aid him. If any did war against them, he should aid them. He should send to his neighbor confederates to certify them of this, that they might not wrong them, but might be likewise comprised in the conditions of peace. And ultimately they were. And that when their men came to them, they should leave their bows and arrows behind them. And then this isn't actually a point of the treaty, that King James would esteem Massasoit as his friend and ally. So that's the treaty.
And here's the emergency meeting they had next day.
The Department of Immigration saying, chief signing executive order, letting you stay in country. So
do you think it was really like that?
and so what we're saying is this was the birth of the American mind and spirit and democracy, the first great synthesis, with the Mayflower Compact, the Wampanoag Treaty, and then the 3-day harvest celebration in the fall of 1621, and 54 years of peace and friendship that ensued until 1675. Yeah, and we've talked about this, that they both experienced extreme loss.
So let's mention that. The surviving Mayflower Pilgrims who met the Native Americans on the spring equinox of 1621 consisted of 4 adult women, 14, that's 1-4, adult men, and 34 children. That's not a very big group, and they're often described as some sort of invading army who did all these terrible things to the native people. That, my friends, is simply not true.
Yeah, and they celebrated the intercultural harvest celebration, 3 days of celebrating with 90 plus Native Americans. And here is a little description, the only description we have of that 3-day intercultural celebration that's now called the first Thanksgiving. And I'll read that to you because it's really short. Our harvest being gotten in, our governor sent for men on fowling, that so we might, after a special manner, rejoice together after we had gathered the fruit of our labors. They 4 in 1 day killed as much fowl as, with a little help besides, served the company almost a week. At which time, amongst other recreations, we exercised our arms, which they had to do to keep their matchlocks functioning. And many of the Indians coming amongst us, and among the rest, their greatest king, Massasoit, with some 90 men, whom for 3 days we entertained and feasted. And they went out and killed 5 deer, which they brought to the plantation and bestowed upon our governor and upon the captain and others. So this was this very special time that happened in the fall of 1621, 400 years ago. Yeah.
This is an important part of the story to really understand this.
Yeah, and we can go together into our hearts again now that we understand that we have done it in the past, and it's at the founding of this nation. So
in case you think we're making this stuff up, and in case you think it's all coming from white folks, here is a colleague of ours. Her name is Betty Booth Donahue. She's a Cherokee linguist, and she's the author of an incredible book called Bradford's Indian Book. I thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, and this book shows the influence of the Native Americans on Governor Bradford's his of Plymouth Plantation, which is known as the first literary piece written in
the first
America.
Literary work that was published in this country.
Yeah, in American literature.
And here's what Betty has to say. 3 little extracts there.
Yeah. She says, natives and pilgrims were as much alike as they were different. Both groups were highly religious, and they understood the power of the spoken word. The pilgrims did not arrive with the idea of taking land from the natives. They wanted to buy it, and did. They lived in close proximity to each other. Indians lived inside the stockade and came and went at will. And this is being proven now by archaeological digs and evidence. And what else she says is, they visited with each other, exchanged ideas and information and goods, and understood each other. Pilgrims viewed the natives as sentient human beings and valued their opinions as much as they feared their savagery. Well, don't we all fear all of our savageries? Mm-hmm. There was mutual respect. Had other colonies followed Plymouth, things would have been very different for natives and whites. Much suffering and loss of life and culture would have been avoided. And here we've got Edward Winslow, who wrote in his diary of the times together with the native people.
We have found the Indians very faithful in their covenant of peace with us, very loving and ready to pleasure us. We often go to them, and they come to us. Some of us have been 50 miles by land in the country with them. not only the greatest king amongst them, called Massasoit, but also all the princes and peoples round about us, have either made suit unto us, or been glad of any occasion to make peace with us, so that 7 of them at once have sent their messengers to us to that end. So that there is now great peace amongst the Indians themselves, which was not formerly, neither would have been but for us. And we for our parts walk as peaceably and safely in the wood as in the highways in England. We entertain them familiarly in our houses, and they as friendly bestowing their venison on us.
I wanted to mention that we actually made, this is part of a film we made called Seeds of Freedom, A Vision for America. And that's a little, I love watching that. It's really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Edward Winslow's personal diary that's been published, you can access it on mayflowerhistory.com, and you can go to original sources and you can download Mort's Relation as well as Good News from New England, and you can read the words of Edward Winslow.
On to the second great synthesis.
On to the second great synthesis. So
Mm.
that's the first great synthesis, 54 years of peace and friendship between these folks.
And how many years, about 150 years later,
yeah,
right, we have the crafting of the US Constitution and the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia
yeah,
in 1787. And that's where this coming together of a whole other group of natives with Benjamin Franklin and the actual founding fathers of this country.
yeah. So we're calling that the second great synthesis. And this is documented, it's known, it's not well known, but the Iroquois Great Law influences the United States, the formation of the United States of America. Ben Franklin's first assignment was to go and create a treaty with the Iroquois, and the 13 colonies were looking for a way to unite. And what Ben discovered was that the Iroquois had come in under this great law, and the various tribes had of different sizes and power structure had come together in this confederacy. So he was very interested in how they had done this, because all the colonies are different sizes, different thinking, different ways, and so how to do it. And he was very curious about that, and actually wrote the Albany Plan, and then the Confederation, Papers of Confederation. And so then the Iroquois were invited to the Continental Congress to advise them. And here are some drawings that illustrate that. So a great peacemaker had come to the Iroquois, and he had brought them this constitution, this great binding law.
And this was already ancient by the time Benjamin Franklin went to meet with them. And it continues to this day.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. The Iroquois Confederacy, and it was in the 1200s. It was about the same time as the Magna Carta. And so what our focus is the evolution of consciousness of humanity. Okay, our desire to be free, our desire to move into our full human potential and our alignment with the divinity, walking that walk. And for how do we actually do that? How do we become truly free? How do we come and act according to our conscience, like what my ancestors, what the Mayflower Pilgrims were looking for, a society based on freedom of conscience, that we could act according to our direct connection. The tribes of the Iroquois had been warring amongst each other for generations. And so it looked impossible for them to pull out of that way of thinking and hating and carrying forth anger and all that. And this great peacemaker brought a condolence ceremony. And that condolence ceremony has to do with going into one's trauma, going into one's fear and all the history that one's carrying and releasing it. And that's what needs to be done now as we go forward, is all of us to go into our shame, our blame, our guilt, our trauma, and release it so we can go forward into a new way of being. And so this Peacemaker brought a new way of seeing. And we feel that this synthesis concept between the European colonists and the American Indian brings forth a new way of thinking, of seeing, of knowing, so that we can open our hearts and know that we have come together. We've given birth to something incredible as we came together and brought our hearts, our spirits, our thinking together. So what the great Peacemaker brought was that. Do you want to?
Okay, so the core teaching of the Great Law is peace was the law, and the law was for peace. Under the Great Law, 50 chiefs and clan mothers, note, clan mothers, we forgot that part, were organized in a three-part system of government with executive, legislative, and judicial divisions. That sound familiar?
Yeah, so this was a participatory democracy and a legal system called the Great Law of Peace. There's three branches of government. We won't go into this in detail because we want to get through this, but there were three branches of government like ours, and the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And the judicial branch was the clan mothers. And
the judicial branch.
Yeah.
So they were like the Supreme Court.
They're like the Supreme Court. They got to veto, they had veto power over war and the power to nominate the chiefs and pull the chiefs if they weren't acting according to their hearts and for the betterment of the people. They could just get pulled if they went into ego or into any kind of behaviors that weren't in alignment with this great law. So here's Oren Lyons speaking about democracy.
So in our Iroquois perception, all life is equal, and that includes the birds, animals, things that grow, things that swim. All life is equal in our perception. And that is from Oren Lyons, who is Onondaga?
Yeah.
I think.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Andrew. We have people who've devoted the time to filling in the picture. So if it's okay, I'm going to take us to our first presenter. But thank you again very much for your life and your labors with this account and opening this horizon of these three great syntheses. So friends, the first of the speakers is Betty Booth Donahue with us, of the Cherokee Nation, author of Bradford's Indian book, Being the True Root and Rise of American Letters, as revealed by the native text embedded in Of Plymouth Plantation. Betty, if you're there, a warm welcome.
Thank you. Wado. Osio. Gwed Dawadoa. Hello, everybody. I'm Betty, and I'm speaking to you today from Wagner, Oklahoma, on lands once governed and inhabited by early Mississippians, or the Mound Dwellers, who were in turn succeeded by Caddos and Wichitas, and followed by Osages, who came in to hunt, and finally by government decree, the Creeks. So I'm a Cherokee hiding with the Creeks. Now, I coined the term Plymouth Paradigm in my volume entitled Bradford's Indian Book to make the point that had the example set by Plymouth in its first 50 years been allowed to continue, relations between America's indigenous people and the European immigrants would likely have been very different. There would certainly be larger numbers of native populations than those we have today. To be clear, however, early relations between the Wampanoags and the English were uncertain. The Plymothians knew from the outset that they were settling into what was obviously someone else's town site, and they were unsure about what the native reaction to their presence would eventually be. It's safe to say that they lived in a state of apprehension until a meeting with Ousamequin, the Massasoit, was arranged by Samoset. When the March meeting with Ousamequin and his fellow tribesmen took place, something very important occurred. A ritual or a kind of ceremony materialized. The Wampanoags had arrived ritually attired with animal skins and paint. The English had arranged seating on the ground. They had spread out a great green rug with 3 or 4 pillows. Drums and trumpets were sounded. Food and drink were served. And then they treated of peace. This peace was maintained for 50 years with one notable exception, and that exception must be acknowledged, because no road to anything is without error. Misled by rumors of pending attack, Winslow and Standish were ordered to make a counter move, and they did approach a group of Massachusetts and killed 6 or 7 of them. Wetuwamut and Pecksuot were among them. Now, this event was followed by an outraged dressing down by John Robinson, the Pilgrim supervising clergyman in Holland, and no such occurrence ever happened again during that 50-year period. The English learned to check out the rumors before reacting, and both groups began to regard each other as fellow human beings. Basically, they liked each other. The Plymothians put their trust in men like Tisquantum, Hobbamock, and even one of Hobbamock's wives. More important, Bradford's history has more than one phrase, the Indians said, and it was obvious that the Pilgrims were listening. It should be pointed out that during these first years, natives and English lived together inside the town. The biggest myth, I suppose, we have is that the English were inside the stockade and the Indians were out. No, it wasn't like that. They lived together. They gossiped, they argued, they sued each other in court, and often the Indians won their cases. They behaved as a community, and they were. Despite the fact that the peace did not last, some things did transpire at that meeting that changed the course of American culture. By the land acknowledgement and the exchange of words taking place at that first meeting, American literature was given form, and descendants of those first people were left with an example to get back to. Yes, there is a city on the hill, but it hasn't been built yet. The Massasoit and Bradford succeeded in accomplishing far more than they knew. They pointed the way to what's possible, and we are grateful. Thank you, Watto.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Betty. What a treat it is to see you and have you with us.
Yeah, Betty, thank you.
Thank you for sharing your perspective, your deep perspective. Thank you, thank you. And so we'll go to the next person. So let's see. Stuart, where'd Stuart go?
Well, can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Somehow I've lost the video. Our next speaker is Reverend Gary Marks, who is a Pilgrim scholar and one whose scholarship arises out of his love and devotion for this part of history. Warm welcome, Gary.
We ask Gary to please turn on your video.
Today, I am very happy to speak to you about the treaty that lasted 50 odd years. There is no doubt that in that treaty and covenant agreed to by two remarkable leaders, Massasoit and Governor Bradford, it was an agreement which was seen to be a cultural protection on the part of both people. They both saw advantages in coming together and forming into a compact. Having separated from the Church of England, and therefore the British monarchy of divine right rule, the separatist church was founded on the one central principle, and that was the principle of the covenant. A covenant is an agreement reached and agreed to by the major part of those involved in what the Pilgrims called owning or interiorizing the covenant. It put in simplistic terms, it put in a simple way the so-called Pilgrim Church agreements are sacred. That is, in the agreements reached after due consideration, the agreement reached is a contact with the divine. And that is the connection between that which is temporal and that which is eternal. And the covenant is the bearer of that relationship. This manner of self-rule, that is, after due deliberation and consideration of all the facts and of all the circumstances involved, was applied not only to their religious gathering, but also to their civic affairs as well. The Mayflower Compact, for instance, which has been mentioned here a number of times, was a civic and covenantal relationship. And it was also considered to be sacred. The agreement reached is always sacred. It is always a connection with the divine. It is, without question, the most important understanding of who the separatists were. And I have no particular religious principle or evangelical purpose in speaking about that. But it is important to know that the covenantal notion got extended not only into religious affairs, but into secular, cultural affairs as well. It stood as a kind of distant testimony to rule by the majority, to democratic first principles, which are covenantal principles, and they are considered and should be considered, at least today, as sacred. I make these comments today because I have a great love for the Pilgrim story, but I have a great love for the Native American story as well. I know more about the Pilgrims because that's been an area of my academic concentration for some years now. But I appreciate the fact that the two cultures, at least for 50 years, got together and served one another and served the common good through a kind of compact, covenant, and agreement. It is a brutal fact of history that after those 50 years, this all came apart. That there was a treatment of the native indigenous peoples that is really unforgivable, and that they were displaced and harmed. But please, when you give consideration to who the Pilgrims were, what their intentions were, and so long as their covenantal notions were binding, they were not out for land. They were out for freedom. They were out to show that governance can exist because there is a sacred dimension to it. And so I thank you for having me here today. And I hope that we can one day recover the great covenantal idea of divine visitation through the covenant. So thank you very much, and may peace prevail forever.
Thank you, Gary. Wow, so good to see you, my friend.
Thank you.
Wonderful to be with you, and you
Andrew.
expressed it so beautifully. So
Beautiful words, Gary. Spoken from the heart. Heartfelt thanks. Barbara is back with us. Barbara, can you come off mute? We'd love to have you pick up if that works.
Okay, I'm here.
So we've introduced Barbara before. Pokanoket clan grandmother and Mayflower Pilgrim descendant. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. Thank you, Creator. March 1621. I would like to touch upon the character of the two brothers. The Massasoit, which was the title, his name was Ousamequin, which means yellow feather. And Quataquina, as from oral history and as history that is written, they were loving, caring, generous persons. Each of the leaders that met the Pilgrims greeted each other with an embrace and a kiss. What a beautiful sight that must have been. As in my heart, I feel the both sides, as I'm a descendant from Stephen Hopkins. Some of the Pilgrims married into the native, and that's how that happened. And also Quataquina being my ancestor grandfather. I feel the both sides, and I feel that they really truly wanted to make peace, and they loved one another and wanted to help each other. And when they gave each other a kiss. Also, Quataquina did not like the sound of the musket fire, as the Pilgrims wanted to honor us, wanted the two leaders, Massasoit and Quataquina, but he didn't like the sound of the guns, so they laid their guns down as we laid our arrows down. Now, the first harvest, the Massasoit and Quataquina bring deer. Quataquina bring a pouch of popcorn. That's when popcorn was introduced. To celebrate the planting success of the first year. This relationship was a very good one and a strong one for the first 50 years. Now, here we are today in our country and what is going on in our country. Why can't we, the people, all of us, not just the Indians, not just the English, all of us in this country and in the world, take the time to know each other, listen to each other, learn from each other, educate each other. And through that education and through that divine vibration of love, we wouldn't be in this situation today. True history did start with this love and this respect. Anawan, Nuuchi, me, Tom, Apag. Thank you, all my relations.
Barbara, thank you very, very much for your words. For reiterating that spirit of peace and that spirit of love that we heard from Gary, who went before you.
Thank you, Barbara, for all you're bringing to this.
Thank you.
So friends, we come to Deha Hande, who's of the Mohawk Turtle Clan from 6 nations of the Grand River Territory in Ontario, Canada. He carries the sacred essence of the Mohawk language. A warm welcome, Daha Handai.
Segum, segum. Thank you very much for having me here today. I really don't know where to start, except maybe to add on to what's already been talked about in the sense of history. And history, I got to ask myself, who is his story? And so we each have our own story of events that happened in the past. And now we're looking back at this. And so I have to think that this looking back into history is what we use to take us into the future. And so what's the future all about? And to me, it has to do with what's been talked about and been touched about on many times is peace on earth. And as people, I think that that's how these agreements began. They began with a peaceful intent. And when we look back on history, the intent sort of faded away in 50 years or so. And so now we have this look at history and say, what are we here today for? We're here today to look into the future. And if we're looking at Indigenous thought, it's been certainly in my background that I've heard from my grandfathers and the such to say that the Native people have never been listened to. The story, if you look anywhere and see the philosophy, is all about unity. It's all about sharing. And these were these covenants that were made And what's the result of these covenants? These covenants leave us today in a situation where there's privileged people and there's people who are not privileged. And it's pretty easy to see who's privileged and who isn't privileged. And I think we need to be thinking today about what it is that we need to do to be equal, in the sense that we are. We're all human beings, and we all have a place here on this earth. And there's no doubt about it. It's like nobody's going anywhere, in a sense. Where we have to share what we have here. And the sad fact is that if we look at the condition of how the earth is right now, it's been stopped by a virus. And what is the virus telling us? The virus is telling us that there needs to be significant change going on in our thinking, in our hearts, and in our minds. And it's not good enough just to acknowledge things anymore. It's time to take action. And so this history is telling us not to repeat history. That's a common thing. And so that's my message to everyone. And for all of those people who are awakening to this truth, I congratulate you, because the things that you're doing, and I congratulate everyone that put this speak together, this knowledge together, because we need to be, as human beings, as who we are right now today, we need to be working so that what we look for in the future is that our children will have a place and a time and be able to enjoy this world in all its beauty, because the truth is it's getting destroyed much too quickly. And so all of those things have reasons, and they all have a solution. And it's up to us to make that change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, De Handai. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dehahanda.
So we come to Gunnison Deer from the Ganawahe Mohawk Territory, Faithkeeper at the Mohawk Trail Longhouse, and I can add the one who was inspired to initiate the call for the return of the Peacemaker. Welcome, Gunnison.
Honda Signore Tana no Hoda on the Gutgawe, Koneka Dokarani Wanage, ne on the Gutgawe. Nets in you go nodo ne Uguahue. I just said a couple of words in my language to welcome each and every one of you in the ancient treaty protocols, because there are many nations that will probably be listening in. In order for me, I'm not going to go into all of the, I guess if I would say the papers and things from that nature. I'm going to go into song, and I'm going to go into a real short understanding of my worldview. So if you ask me, who am I? I'm Ogohue. What does that mean? That this walking soil that gives the spirit ability to express itself is a male. Comes from the root word zinawe, which means forever. If you ask me, well, what does that mean? Well, we have our own creation story that we talk about, Izinut Karuhyadi, the other side of the blue. Who are there? Karuhyage Ronu. What does that translate to? Spirit beings. So this is who I am. I have this spirit essence that is forever, that gives its ability to express itself through this walking soil. Now in our creation story, we have Yedzit Zizu, because our worldview is everything started with women, not only one woman, but two women. And then this woman's daughter births what we call today our creator. And then when she dies, from her body comes all of these gifts. From her head, the tobacco. From her breast, the corn. From her heart, the strawberry. From her fingers, the beans. From her navel, the squashes. And then from her feet, the potatoes. When Sky Woman put all of this into existence, she sang a song. Now all of us have a belly button. And because you have a belly button, without a doubt, you know who your mother is, your grandmother is, and on, all the way on down. But for us, it takes us all the way back to our first mother, which is Mother Earth. Now, none of us can eat money. We've been given sacred instructions, and those sacred instructions talk about all of these things in this natural world. All have spirit, they all have sacred energy, and we connect with that through sacred song. So to the unconditional love that our Mother Earth continues to give us from the beginning of time to now, I'm going to ask that you just listen to a sacred song that connects you to your belly, to the Mother Earth, so that hopefully it'll change our consciousness and our thinking about how we have to have a better relationship with her. So this is a water drum. There's water in here because water is life. Sky Woman leaves that upper world and then also follows water and comes to this lower world because there is life. Look at your own birth story. Your mother's water will break, those contractions start, and you're literally pushed from that womb through the birth canal to this physical world. So our creation story and our physical birth story is one of the same. So now you can go on the radio and listen to Top 10 anytime, but I'm going to take you to a sacred psalm that connects you to your belly button to the Mother Earth. Now, that being said, when we understand this spiritual knowledge that I shared with you just now, we understand the sacredness of women, that as men, we all come out of that sacred vessel of a woman that's connected to the Mother Earth and the Grandmother Moon. And we as men are connected to the Elder Brother Sun and the Thunder beings. It all has to do with relationship. When we understand that, we fully get the interconnectedness of all life. We can't go to war with each other. We can't kill. We can't rape. We can't destroy the Mother Earth. And we have a responsibility that the Peacemaker said to think 7 generations ahead. So now we're in this time, and we talked about sacred compact that was made, and it's true. Goswanta, that talks about the relationship between the canoe and the big ship with sails, that goes to about 1620, but then we go to 1609 with the Friendship Treaty Belt that again reinforces, because the early Europeans said they came with God and his son Jesus. And we said, well, we talk about the Great Spirit. So when they told us about this, we said, we think we're talking about the same sacred energy. And then we were supposed to smoke the peace pipe and travel the river of life like this, but we all know what happened. But now we're in time of the indigenous spiritual resurrection that I see, that now this indigenous spiritual knowledge is resurrecting up, and all of us have all been harmed in some way, shape, or form, either because of multi-generational trauma, about losses, about war, about all of this stuff. Now we are in a time where we better get it together, all of us as human beings, to start seeing different, to start hearing different, to start speaking different, and we better start doing different, because if not, human beings will not be along very much longer, and we'll have no one to blame but ourselves, because we looked at this sacred earth, our mother, as something that we could plunder, and we don't have a right to do it, because when you fully get it, this is truly the Garden of Eden. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Kevin. Wow,
Yeah.
so beautiful. So happy to have you here with us.
Thank you.
So friends, we move to, is it Vermont, Dot? A warm welcome to you. Dot has devoted a lifetime and more to peace building, to education that inspires cooperation on behalf of the common good. Welcome, Dot.
Thank you. Thank you, Stuart. And it is a great joy to be in this sacred circle with everyone today. The ageless wisdom tells us synthesis is, unity must be created. And there's a great call sounding forth in the heavens as the solar lord of love, Jupiter, and the solar lord of light, Saturn,
stand together in Aquarius. And on the December solstice, 2020, they entered Aquarius together, heralding the new era and the promise of a world savior. That world savior is us, as the heart center of humanity awakens in answer to this call. In the sign of Aquarius, where both Jupiter and Saturn remain throughout 2021, they assert the necessity to understand and plan universal brother-sisterhood, the essential unity or golden relations between all worlds, as we set the template for the new Aquarian era. As our Indigenous brothers and sisters step forth in unity of purpose, hearts connected across distance, both sides of the veil, offering ancestral wisdom in all of life, wisdom that guides us, we are reminded that we are all indigenous to this beautiful planet we call home, planet Earth, and that the primary idea of Aquarius is unity through right relationships. We will then realize peace on Earth. Peace. Living in right relationship with self, others, and all life, in a spirit of sharing, cooperation, and loving understanding. This was indeed at the heart of the new America that was envisioned, and E pluribus unum, of many, one, speaks to this realization that we are not separate. We are indeed essentially interconnected with and within all of life. So in the midst of experiencing an all systems breakdown right now, we are simultaneously experiencing an all systems breakthrough as we now strive to shift from human-centric governance to ecocentric governance, based on equal and just laws that serve the common good in a world that works for everyone. Silence is the synthesis of all sound. Let us enter the silence together, hearts connected, both sides of the veil, and experience synthesis for just a moment. The great solar lord Venus is to the earth what the higher self is to the lower self. And this Friday, March 26th, Venus and Earth will align with the sun. Thus, the manifest breath of Earth and Venus will be in golden proportion between the personality, Earth, us, humanity, and the soul, Venus, our spiritual elders, guided by the fiery center, the sun, and the peaceful, silent will of the Creator. This moment in time is a great opportunity for us to shift in consciousness, to realize the beauty, the power, the love that we live in, to honor our oneness, coming together in unity with the shared intention to live in alignment with the original instructions from the Creator. So in 2021, the prototype year for the age of Aquarius, may we affirm in our hearts an alliance of all world servers, standing together in the fire of love, creating the conditions for the culture of peace, a world that works for everyone and all life. We are building that world together. We are living love. Synthesis is, unity must be created. So be it. Om Shanti.
Thank you, Dot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dot.
Thank you.
Such a treat to have you here. Dot Maver, Global Silent Minute.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Connie and Andrew.
So, Dot, your words have beautifully introduced my offering. I thank you for that. I speak, friends, on behalf of the spirit of Concord, Massachusetts. the home of the praying Indians of the first non-native inland community, the crucible of the American Revolution, in the home of some of America's most prophetic voices, not just Emerson, Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, or Joan of Arc, and others. I want to dedicate these few words to someone I consider a kind of a godfather, who's Tom Porter. I want to speak about the three twin principles of the Iroquois Confederation, and as a bridge into our time with a third great synthesis. They hold, I think, a key to our future on behalf of the children, our children and the generations to come, on behalf of all our relations. I first met Tom when I brought a busload of student leaders from New Hampshire's high schools in 2000 to Albany, searching for the native roots of democracy. Tom was in a full auditorium and he told us the story of the Peacemaker. He began, as those who know Tom and have heard him tell the story, by recounting how everywhere the women went in those days, there were tears in their eyes. If they were by the river, if they were in their homes, if they were in their gardens, along the paths in the woods, there were tears in their eyes because their husbands, sons, fathers, brothers were dying in a horrendous war. And Tom's word raised tears in my own eyes, which led to our meeting and to a friendship that has lasted now 21 years. In terms of the story of the Peacemaker, I often share with friends that it offers us the archetypal understanding of how evil, what we call evil, is truly addressed in these shores, on this land. And that is, the Peacemaker didn't try to take out Tadadaho. He didn't run away from him. He didn't kneel down before him. He didn't curse him, but he sought his redemption. He sought Tadadaho's redemption, and that came to pass. The genius behind that, I believe, lies in the three twin principles of the Iroquois Confederation. And sometimes when I speak about it in schools with students, I ask them, what are the concerns that lie deepest on your hearts? What is the concern that lies deepest on your heart? The environment, education, war, whatever it is. I suggest that if you trace that concern back to its root, that you will discover an imposition of one of the three spheres of society, political, economic, or cultural being religion, education, the arts, scientific inquiry. You'll find the imposition of one of these three spheres on the others. Once again, if we think about what concerns lie deepest on our hearts, and if we ask ourselves the questions, how can we address it? If we trace it back to the root, I believe we'll discover an imposition of one of these three spheres on the others. David Corton wrote a book, When Corporations Rule the World. That is a business sphere imposing itself in a kind of a dis-ease upon the cultural and political sphere. So I want to conclude by simply mentioning my understanding through Tom and others of the three twin principles of the Iroquois Confederation. And in this sense, they are the bridge from the second synthesis to the third synthesis, which we're in the midst of as we speak and are fashioning and forging as we speak, in which we'll go into at greater length into the nuts and bolts, the devils and the details, tomorrow, beginning at 3:33 on the same Zoom gathering. And that tomorrow is the actual day, the 22nd of March, 400 years ago. So I want to build a bridge to tomorrow's gathering, beginning at 3:33 on the 400th anniversary, and a warm welcome to one and all. And from there to a global Thanksgiving, at Thanksgiving, the 400th Thanksgiving, this coming November. So the three twin principles say that if you wish to achieve justice in the political or rights sphere, we have to become righteous inwardly. Righteousness inwardly leads to justice outwardly in the political or legal rights sphere. In the economic sphere, the goal is peace, world peace. If we have factories and doing business all over the world, we're less inclined, one would hope, to enter into war. That peace outwardly in the economic sphere, in my understanding of the three twin principles, arises out of health inwardly in each one of us. When we become healthy inwardly, no dis-ease, no disbalance, but healthy inwardly, that leads to peace outwardly. And lastly, the cultural sphere. And we're talking about in the 4-H club inspired by the native peoples, head, heart, hands, when they're balanced and working together in the body individual and in the body social, lead to the 4th H, health. Head, heart, hands equals health. In the cultural sphere, spiritual power inwardly, one can think of a minister, of a true teacher, of a scientist whose integrity of research is impeccable, as a conductor of an orchestra who has to master and hold the entire breadth of an orchestra. That spiritual power inwardly, this work that we're all called upon to do, leads to authority, true authority outwardly. So friends, those are the three twin principles in my understanding of the Iroquois Confederation. We'll go into greater lengths with them tomorrow when we gather into the nuts and bolts on the 400th anniversary to see what we can truly do in the spirit of mutual protection and in the spirit of peace, building the bridge to the 400th global Thanksgiving this coming November.
Tony Whedon.
Well, thank you, Stuart, for closing this beautiful sharing time with the three principles. And if all the presenters could undo their cameras and come on so we can say goodbye to everyone, it would be wonderful. And we just want to say in this time of equinox, where the balance between light and darkness is a fact right now in all our lives globally, that we think of balance and we think of coming together. And we know now that today is a day of change, that we have the choice now of, are we going to go to the light or are we going to go to the darkness? So we just celebrate this equinox and the signing of this treaty on equinox. If we think of the providential aspect of this, that this treaty was signed on the equinox, it's pretty astounding. And I just thank everyone who has shared their knowledge and their hearts and spirits for coming amongst us, because these are all old friends. We've all been at this for so long. And just thank everybody for showing up and expressing and broadening what Andrew and I have brought. So, you know, we have our perspective, everybody has their perspective, and it's said that when we all come together, we will bring the hoop of life together. We will create the hoop of life when we all put our pieces together. So thank you. And Stuart for hosting, and Stuart for picking up on this synthesis idea and championing it and bringing it forward. And also Chief Phil Lane and Adriana Alvarez and all the people who have supported this endeavor.
John, who's been behind the scenes and is
Yeah.
And
John
modern
Ray.
day.
John and Becky, thank you so much, family. Everybody, bless you, bless you.
Yes, it's what a treat. So we could turn on, everybody could turn on their
There's Brother Phil.
well, there's Brother Phil. Hi, Brother Phil. And so everybody could turn on their cameras now and say hello to everyone. And we're going to transition now.
Check out your family, friends. Look at this.
Yeah, we're going to transition now into, Becky, can you tell us how to get where we're going so that everybody can now speak? It will be open for a talking circle that
we have to go into another Zoom.
We have to know
room,
another
right?
room. And Barbara Mary Kerfus will lead that talking circle, and we'll follow the protocols of a talking circle. But I just want everybody to turn on their cameras if they can, so we can say hello, hello, and thank you for being here. And we say hello to all those folks out in Facebook land. And we just say, let's go forward together in the name of Massasoit, the Massasoit Ousamequin, and the Mayflower Pilgrims who met in their hearts and in a high vibration of a vision of how we could be together, walk together in peace and friendship.